Yeah, Jim, like we were talking about, I think this is episode 28, and it's the second one in the series that's focused on our program. And the program, just to remind people, is the foundational part of the program is the flywheel of self. And just for imagery, um, picture a circle with concentric circles around it that goes out layer after layer after layer. And in the middle of this wheel, in the center, in the palm of this proverbial hand, if you will, is self, the ego. And we talk a lot about all of the hyphenated words that come from self awareness, self examination, self accountability, self worth, self confidence. That there's a litany of possible self words that kind of define who we are, right? They create our persona. And outside of that, if you move outwardly, like a dropping a stone in the water and those circles just expanding, the first five key areas that we really focus most of our attention on are worldview, health, profession, money, and people or relationships. And today we're going to talk about worldview. There's going to be a total of 7 of these specifically focused on what the program is all about, what we're doing at the Imperfect Men's Club. And so this is the third one. The first one was kind of an introduction to the whole structure. The second one, the last one we did, was on health. This one's going to be on worldview. And so we've talked a lot about how does one have a worldview? How does one develop a worldview? And in our humble estimation, we've kind of determined that, well, how you were raised, your childhood, who raised you, what your parents' worldview was, and any other adults that were impactful in your life, like coaches or teachers or uncles or aunts. You grow up with a worldview based on your childhood, and then you start to have experiences as a young adult. You start to gain, other responsibilities, perhaps families, kids, wives, husbands, businesses. And, the worldview shifts for most of us because that childhood and adulthood are completely opposite, basically. And so, I would classify myself as a right-leaning conservative that it probably would prefer to be called maybe closer to the center. I like to think of myself as pragmatic, as practical. Things need to make sense to me. I don't really care about the label, but we're putting labels on this stuff just so we can kind of put a container on the discussion, if you will. What are your thoughts on that, Jim?
Well, my thoughts are that we did this maybe a few years ago when we first started the podcast, and then as time goes on, we really flushed it out, and it just gets better, in my opinion. Even though the original concepts haven't changed, I think we're better in articulating the message of what's going on in our lives, and this obviously applies to every human being, but our concentration, our focus is on men, at a stage in their life where these 4 areas of their life become very important, of their self-identity, their self-worth, everything that goes back to the self, right? So, like, for example, in my even day-to-day conversations, you can just see how this is playing out in somebody's life. I got a call recently for somebody. We do business together, but he had a question about some pretty personal stuff, right? And it was obvious that that his health, in this case, it was his mental and physical health, were really affecting everything else. And then I could say, hey, that probably has a lot to do with the business, because it's very stressful at the moment, what they're going through. And so it bleeds into their profession. And then, of course, that affects his money, because he's got 2 kids and I think 2 wives or 2 ex-wives or whatever he's going through.
Yeah.
And the worldview. He happens to be a part of the world that there's a lot of uncertainty that's going on, and his worldview, because he's in Europe, or he's near the Ukraine war, and is affecting a lot of things in his life. So yeah, the worldview, we break it down into what really I think who we are, our core, our core self, which we break into these different areas. One, worldview, and then it's politics, right?
Mhm.
Especially as we get older, we
Mhm.
become more stuck in our ways. As you said, whether you're on the left or the right or the center, you've pretty much locked into what you're going to be the rest of your life, and it's unlikely you're going to change or change anybody else's mind. That's on your political views, and especially in this country, right? Red or blue. Kind of sad, but
Yeah.
true. Is my
Yeah,
and
it's I look at the worldview thing, and I talk a lot about
yeah.
different places with different people about
Yeah.
politics. I
But
enjoy talking about.
then, yeah, before we go into politics, let me just
Yeah,
finish my thought about
yeah,
the
yeah.
worldview, because the other second category, that is our, we refer to as our childhood. And so much of what we believe is based on our childhood.
Hmm.
I can go back, and I believe it's that, 10 to 15-year-old age where you're taken in the world, and then we broke that down into two other areas too. That's our heritage, that's our nationality, that's our heritage, that's our neighborhood, that's a lot to do with who we are today. And then our spirituality, which is our faith. So if
Yeah.
you're raised Catholic versus, Muslim, there's you're going to see the world differently. And so yeah, that's what, when we break it down, it's funny because every time you have these conversations, the we start off by saying this is the most important area of our
Hmm.
life of the
Hmm.
five, but they're all important, and they're all constantly evolving and changing, so they get adjusted based on the question is what is driving you right now. And I'll speak for myself, then we'll get to the politics. Yeah, I'm bothered by the politics, and this is, all of this is subconscious, right? It's what is going on with especially with our president, and with the division between, um, the House and the Senate, and the Republicans and the Democrat. That creates anxiety, creates uncertainty, and I think it does affect us in other areas of our life, whether it be our mental health, whether it be our profession, money, where it's scarcity, and even how we interact with different people, from with different belief systems. So yeah, now we can start talking about this area of worldview, and probably the most important thing, especially in mid age, is politics, because
Well, it's a it's an interesting phrase, and I think that as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself of the connection to the center of the circle, the self. If you are self accountable, if you believe in personal responsibility, if you believe in people being held accountable, I think that shapes your worldview one way. If you believe that
absolutely.
we should be able to say whatever we want,
Mhm.
with the very few exceptions of screaming fire in a theater, things that are will threaten someone's life. I'm not talking about bad words. I'm not talking about hurtful words. We can say those, right? And if someone's offended by what I say, and I've had no intention of offending, I'm not taking responsibility for that. And I think this self accountability piece shapes where you go in all five areas. And I think that I see too much bad behavior going unpunished. I don't think we're not holding people accountable. And I'm not talking about Democrats or Republicans. I'm talking about everybody. I'm talking about from the community level to what's going on in the schools with all this transgender stuff in third grade, and gender confusion. And there's just every single one of these issues has to do with telling people what they can say, telling people what they can't say, where they can be, what they have to do. I mean, you can throw the mandate with the vaccine in there. All of this to me is the same view. And my worldview on all of it is, first, and I've told you this a lot, but when something bad is presented to me, say an accident, a crime, a video, an audio, an article, and I've never heard it before, I don't conclude anything immediately. Anything. I become self-aware. I start to self-assess, you know, who's giving me this message? Where is there money attached to it somewhere? Right? What are the potential, players in this message? What am I looking at? Right? What happened just before this? What is happening just after this? In other words, Jim, from a worldview standpoint, when something political comes my way, and typically something bad politically, because good things should be celebrated, I don't conclude anything. I assess, I stop, I pause. And I don't think enough of us do that. I think, you see you see the January 6th thing, for instance, and you go, why are we looking at stuff today and not 3 years ago? Why did it take 3 years to have all that footage come out? Well, Mark, we saw the bad stuff that went on, so we can assume it was all bad stuff. No, we can't. We need context. All of these events that take place in the world, wars, crimes, riots, fires, floods, whatever, accidents, without context, you don't know what you're looking at. And I think we just play in that sandbox way too much.
Yeah, it reminds me of when we came up with the flywheel. It was based on radiant thinking, right? And radiant thinking is it's yourself, and then you radiate out a thought. When you look at the structure of the flywheel, it also radiates back into ourself. So, like you said, if you're caught up on the politics, or you're agitated by what's going on in the world, it does come back to ourself, and it does affect us, and then we push that out to everything we do, whether we're aware of it or not. But moving on, again, the politics thing that can go on. We can make the whole show about politics. The problem with it is we don't know what the truth is, and everything is. I love your quote one time when you and I had not a disagreement, but we had a disagreement that about using too much politics in the podcast. And your comment, which actually, by the way, I'll give you credit, has held true. I said, Mark, I don't want to make it all about politics. And you said to me, Jim, it's always about politics.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I remember that.
I wanted I wanted you to be wrong and me to be right. But the more that I thought about the way you were saying, again, you weren't trying to argue with me. Your point was, of course, it's about politics. It always becomes about politics. And it does, whether you're at the school board, whether you're at the coffee shop, where it always becomes about politics. Now, what I don't want to do is get divided by the politics of maybe that's exactly what you're saying is, let's be respectful. Let's try to learn from each other about their perspective, and it shouldn't be divided down the blue and the red lines. I think it's the lowest form of a human when you have a conversation based on defending your tribe, and that's just I'm just to the point now where once that starts to happen, I just would rather in the conversation move on to something else, or find somebody else to talk to if that's all they want to talk about.
I think it's so interesting. My only rule, it's not my only rule of thumb, but one of my major rules of thumb when in communication is that when I'm talking to someone with whom I disagree, or they disagree with me, usually both, I have no interest in changing their mind. I have no interest in convincing them of anything. I find dialogue with people that don't agree with me fascinating, right? But I think where it breaks down, and this isn't political, this is about communication. You can attach it to politics for sure, but it's like, if you can't disagree with me, or you can't bring supporting data to your position, and it's obvious to me that your position is simply emotional, I can't do anything with that. We can't do anything with that. We can't make progress. But I think the other side of that, the childhood thing, I think is kind of interesting as well. And I think because of all the work,
let's talk about that. I actually, I'll share. I think before we started this recording, was at an event in San Francisco this last weekend, and so Pacific Heights, right? This is this is where all the people that we love to hate live and are from. And it was it was one of those amazing, these summer nights where you can see the Golden Gate Bridge and a little bit. So, nice function, but certainly didn't want to talk about politics. There was probably going to be nothing in common if we started to talk about the politics, but that was a group of like 20 people. But what I like to lead with, if I'm going to engage somebody or meet somebody, one of my first questions typically is, where did you grow up? Where did you go to high school? Where did you grow up? Because regardless of your politics, regardless of your worldview, you're going to have more in common with somebody that grew up with a similar background, or you'll have an idea of their starting point, and there's some often common ground, right? Of based on the place and the time. So if they graduate from high school in the 80s or 90s, versus 70s, and you can have a general idea of that part of the in this case, the Bay Area, or anywhere in the world, or for that matter, in a different country, right? Somebody says, "Oh, I grew up in Europe." Well, that's a very different worldview.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, one of the things that's interesting is that, and I've told you this before too, my girlfriend and I, she grew up in a very different environment, politically, familially, geographically, but we were born in the same year. So we're from the same generation.
Makes a
right?
huge difference. You have common
Huge,
ground. You have a common
huge.
perspective. Your worldview,
Yeah.
at least from a timeline perspective, you have some commonality, right?
Oh,
And you
think of it, Jim. Music, movies, right? Traditions.
yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
it's funny that the event I went to, they had a theme party. It was supposed to be a 70s theme party, which what is 70s, right? That bleeds into early 60s and early 80s. So, everybody was supposed to wear a costume. It was kind of fun, but yeah, you're right. Yes, one person's definition of the 70s is very different. Early 70s versus late 70s.
oh, dude, think of the phrases we used to use.
Yeah,
And I don't need to use them here. It'd be kind of fun, maybe, but
yeah,
that you're not even allowed to use anymore. Right.
yeah.
Think of movies by Mel Brooks.
Well, let's just start with movies, because again, the phrases, but the commonality, because at that time we were just joking around, and I don't want to get to the old days are better, nostalgia. I don't want to get into that conversation, but it's true that if you'd gather around the TV, because if you missed the show, there was no way to rewind it and watch it later. There was no DVR, there was no technology. So, and there wasn't that many shows, right? And those shows we have in common, because that's very much part of our American culture. And and that was at that time. It's very different than today, right? Where you don't have to sit down, and maybe a football game is the only thing that you need to watch in real time if you care, but you can even watch that later. So yeah, so childhood. I'm glad you mentioned time period, because that will shape your worldview. But let's keep going with the child view, or a childhood, I should say. And then within childhood, we broke it into two other subcategories, which is heritage, nationality, huge part, right? You're Irish. I'm Swiss Italian, and my father was a lot of other things. My grandparents spoke Italian. I mean, spoke Spanish, and the other side of my family spoke Italian. So yeah, of course, that's part of who I am, right? This blend of these two cultures. That's
yeah. And the thing about well, the movies thing I was thinking was just a couple of one TV show and one movie that I'm sure you can still watch them, but they would never allow them to be made today. Blazing Saddles and All in the Family.
Yeah.
Right. And
I don't know. I don't remember that one. That's what I'm saying. I want to get into the movies. I want to get into specifics. I think it's just more, if you have watched that movie, you have some commonalities. That's
you do. And the other thing that's interesting about the impressions that are made on us when we're children is we're not conscious of many of them. Maybe arguably most of them. We heard someone say something, we saw someone react to something. Whenever this happens, Dad did that, and it's like, well, now as a 62-year-old man, science proves that all of that childhood experience, including any trauma, is unless I spend
Passed on.
time,
It's part of your DNA. Absolutely.
unless I spend time in self-awareness
Yeah.
and aggressively do things like meditate and pray and visualize,
Mm-hmm.
those subconscious influences
Our drivers.
are working in the background, driving my behavior and my attitudes.
Absolutely.
Right. And
Yeah.
so, you and I have both done some pretty good work in the spiritual space and the subconscious mind space and the visualization space.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reticent to get into that space most of my young adult life. I thought it was nonsense. And that had to do probably with my Catholic upbringing, right? If it's not Catholic, it doesn't work. Well, we find out that's not true, right?
But I'd say what you just described is quite accurate in general, as far as how Catholics and not just the Catholics, but many other religions believe that too, right? They're competing with your thoughts. They're competing for your belief system, your time, and often your money.
Yeah, well, I think
so that's what organized religion is. Yeah.
I had a real good example in my dad, which I bring up all the time, and the way he practiced Catholicism was not getting in other people's faces and telling people what to believe. He used it almost exclusively as internal mental and emotional medication, and his relationship with God is deep and profound, and he's the happiest guy I know. So, it's challenging, because there's also as we all know, a side of the Catholic Church that's not so good, and so, but
because it is an organization, there is a hierarchy, and it is a business. It's an industry, and it's a profitable business. That
it's any large institution is going to have, like the pedophilia thing with the Catholic Church. I think it was 3%. I heard 3 or 4%, and that's what it is in the general population. So,
but you're right, and 3% is not that much, but that's a lot in a large.
It's horrible. It's horrific. But I'm talking about relativity.
I agree with you. I'm not discounting the relevance of that. I meant, just like you said, 3% doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot of people when you have such a large organization like the Catholic Church. So,
but isn't it also interesting that number, without additional numbers, like, well, how many are in there total? Like, everything needs more context, and worldview it's where we fall down all the time. Our worldviews are, I suspect that we're not all always in control of our worldviews, that a lot of our worldviews are emotional. I know that's the case, and I try to stay rooted in those two things, stay rooted in objectivity whenever possible, deal with facts and not emotions when you're having tough discussions, and be conscious of the fact that you got a lot of childhood stuff going on that unattended to is probably not serving you the way it could if you attended to it. I think that's a true statement.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of a conversation I was having with my daughter recently, my adult daughter, and something had come up. I don't know if it was a disagreement. Definitely, we have a different worldview by far, and that's that's not an insult. That's maybe a compliment to her that she's developed her own worldview, which is very different than mine. And the conversation went down like this, where I said, hey. I won't use her name, but I just said, hey, just so you know, before we get into the specifics about, I was doing the best I could when I was raising you. I never hit you. I never hit your mom. Yeah, I may have been, in your opinion, over aggressive, but I grew up at a certain place at a certain time. It was very violent, and by the way, I loved it. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Yeah.
So I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me by any means, but we solved our problems physically. And that was very much part of my personality, especially, during your childhood, maybe. And the other thing is I played rugby for 20 consecutive seasons at one point at the highest level, with national championships. And I was a very aggressive, kind of, what do you almost a Neanderthal of a human being, because you have to be in order to play, such a violent game. And again, I
Yeah.
wouldn't trade it for the world. It was the best experience of my life. Some of my
Yeah.
best friends. So, but that was my worldview. That was my how, and it was also a long time ago. And I've since then have had to work on myself, because that doesn't always apply. Like it was working at that time. It doesn't mean that that same self or that same person can continue that behavior, in different stages of their life. And so
Well, that recognition though is the definition of self-awareness. I mean,
yeah.
we all have to make adjustments to the way that we behave. I remember for a long time when I competed in anything,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to win. I wanted to beat the shit out of the person I was playing. I hit my aunt in the stomach with an overhead smash playing tennis when I was like 18.
I'm not sure you're,
Dude, I
you
was
weren't
like,
proud of that, but it happened, right? She was on the field.
I remember it like it was yesterday, and it was terrible. And I don't know when, I never believed, and I'm sure you didn't either. I never believed in letting my children beat me at anything. I wanted them to earn that, right?
Yeah.
And because eventually they do. So
Yeah.
eventually you get slower and they get faster. You get smaller and they get bigger.
Yeah.
You get dumber and they get smarter, whatever it is.
All the above, right?
But yeah, no, I think I think we could all use, whether it's recognizing what's influencing you today from your childhood, or rethinking your worldview to become more at ease with things and more able to speak to people that don't necessarily agree with you. Because what's the point? We don't have to agree about everything. You and I don't agree about everything. We agree about most things, but not everything. And when you say something I disagree with, I don't get upset. I reflect, and you do the same thing. I think that's the way to go through life, man.
I do too. And again, I love to learn by others, not go into a conversation trying to convey my position or my belief system, but I want to just sit and listen and learn about a perspective. Maybe that if I hadn't met that person, then I would have never known about that. And that's how we become more compassionate. We become more knowledgeable. I think we become our best self, going back to ourself. And
yeah,
I
like
have to say, I think that happens over time, because when I was 30 or 40, I'm not sure I was interested in listening to anybody, like you said.
Well, you think about where you are in the stages of life. I mean, I remember when I was 40, I was that was at the time at which I was making the most money I'd ever made in my life, and I'd been making a lot of money for a long time. So I was probably considered rich. Not that that matters, but that's I'm a different person, and that I'm doing different things. I'm thinking about things differently. I have different levels of appreciation for things. Maybe I'm not as humble as I could be. Maybe I was still cocky because that helped me get there, And so these adjustments, and then the divorce, and then the raising of my children, and now my children are young adults. And I spent a lot of time talking to my two daughters as if I were their mother and their father, because they didn't have a mother. That changed me. That really taught me a lot more about how women think and how listening is so important, and just not talking all the time and not solving problems or fixing anything. They just want to be heard. These are, if you're paying attention and you are self-aware, you notice these things and you make adjustments, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yeah. It brings us back to something we started talk about in the very beginning, or we didn't mention it, but we were going to include it in today's episode, and that was being authentic, right? Because when you are truly authentic, your authentic self, you don't give up those things to try to please somebody. You stay true to who that is, and you're okay with people not liking you. That's a good place to be.
It is,
because that they're not everybody's going to like you for whatever their reasons are, and it's hard not to take that personal. I think, especially when you're younger and you're trying to get things accomplished. But I think you get to a certain point where it's okay. You can not like me. That's fine. but I'm going to stay true to myself, because once we start to change our belief system to accommodate somebody else, we give up our self-worth and we give up our dignity of,
Yes.
of what we truly believe. And nobody
Uh,
wants to be around somebody like that. Those people make me very, very uncomfortable. And
yeah. No, I'm glad you brought it up, Jim. It's a great way to conclude, and a couple of comments about that. I think that, you know, I was a boss for a long time. I was a leader for a long time, arguably still am, I guess. Um, I never wanted anybody to kiss my ass. It repulsed me. That is one of the most inauthentic things one can do. And so I attracted people that weren't inclined to want to kiss my ass. And I think we do that, when we take a stance on something, we attract people that take similar stances on that. I think there's such a level of inauthenticity in our leadership, and I don't even like calling them leaders. The people in positions of power, I think, is a better phrase. And I don't know that there's anything more attractive than someone being authentic. Even someone online who's acting like a goofball, doing embarrassing things. They're just sending the world a message like, I don't care what you think. There's some people are going to think this is hilarious, and some people are going to think you're an idiot. And good for you for being able to go out. That's brave and authentic. And I think maybe authenticity, it's becoming one of my favorite words, because as I write more online, as I expose myself to criticism online with videos and content and podcasts like this, I'm gonna attract the person that thinks like me, and I'm gonna repulse the person that doesn't. And I'm okay with that. And that, I don't know how long that took me, but it's arguably a few years to really get to a place where I'm like, I don't give a shit what you think about me. I'm not running around trying to offend people. I'm not running around being mean to anybody. I'm nice to everyone. I'm kind to everyone. I think I bring a good bit of humility to the table because of my life experience. And, if you're offended by something I say, you get too much time on your hands,
yeah, it also reminds me of intention, because you if you have good intentions, we can have disagreements on worldviews, but if your intentions are for good, I don't think it discounts it, right? It may not be what I believe it should be used for, but intention and being authentic,
Mm-hmm.
they go together. But like you
Yeah,
said,
no. Yeah, I think intentions are a double-edged sword, right? Good intentions are a good thing, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Actions
mm-hmm.
are required as well. You got to show up too.
Yeah,
And I just wanted to put that in context. I know that you agree with me about that, but
yeah,
um, yeah, if your intentions are good and people take offense, that's on them, you
yeah.
know. And but you gotta show up. And I think this whole thing keeps coming back to self-awareness. Isn't that interesting?
It is, yeah. And self-evaluation.
Yeah.
You're evaluating yourself. And then the one word that I use often is humility. I think a little humility in life, not a little bit, not too much, but it does make us human. And without it, that's failure. Then you never have to stop and self-reflect about maybe I'm off, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. That's part of maturity. It's also part of being authentic, that you stay true to yourself,
Yeah. Yeah.
through humility, through adversity and failures and things like that. I think that you
Yeah.
find, if people that have been through that often could be good people. Talk about this, particularly with people that struggle with drugs or some other addictions. They can come out the other end better
Yeah.
if they
Yeah.
stay true to who they are, and they have good intentions. So
Yeah, I think and we can wrap up. I think, to put it in context, I think, this is the second spoke on the wheel. The third one, we haven't decided which one we'll pick next, but we'll have, all of this reminds me over and over. I haven't used the phrase yet, but the imperfection component of what we're doing.
the
And
imperfection is the perfection.
yeah, you love that phrase, and I'm getting
Yeah.
kind of fond of it as well. But yeah, I think this is the foundational nature of what we're doing, and I think that I think there's value in it. I think people can learn from it. I'm learning from it, and it's good stuff, Jim. So we'll see everyone next week, and we'll pick our topic between now and then.
Sounds great.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.